No one in the courtroom expected what happened next. The doors swung open, not with the hesitant creak of a worried defendant, but with the heavy, unified march of authority. 4 uniformed sheriff's deputies entered first, boots striking in perfect rhythm, badges catching the overhead lights. Behind them came 2 sergeants, a captain, and finally a young man in plain clothes whose hands trembled so visibly that even the court stenographer paused mid-keystroke. Judge Frank Caprio, who had presided over thousands of cases spanning decades, slowly set his glasses down. Something was wrong. Something more than wrong. Something deeply human was about to unfold, and every single person in that courtroom knew it. The clerk cleared her throat, though her voice wavered as she read the charge. Your Honor, this is case number 24-978. The defendant, Mr. Ethan Harrow, stands charged with failure to appear on 3 parking citations and obstruction during a traffic stop. The courtroom murmured. 3 parking tickets didn't warrant this entourage. Not the deputies, not the supervisors, not the tense silence they carried with them like a storm cloud. Ethan looked barely 20. Sleepless shadows carved hollows under his eyes. He kept rubbing the base of his thumb. A nervous tell, quick and frantic, as though he were trying to erase something only he could see. Behind him, the row of uniformed officers sat, stiff-backed and stone-faced. Their presence wasn't supportive. It was supervisory, watchful, controlling. Even the prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Judge Caprio took in the scene, his sharp eyes scanning faces, postures, breaths. Something was off. Something was being hidden, and the courtroom felt it like a held breath. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows resting gently on the bench. His gaze settled on Ethan, not the badges behind him. Good morning, Mr. Harrow, he said, voice calm, deep, steady. You look a little nervous today. A ripple of uneasy laughter crossed the room, but Ethan didn't smile. Caprio continued, gentler now. I want you to understand something before we begin. In this courtroom, everyone is equal. Titles stay at the door, fear stays at the door, and the truth, only the truth, walks in with us. He paused, letting his words sink in. Then he glanced at the cluster of uniformed men behind Ethan. Everyone is welcome to observe, Caprio said slowly, but no one is permitted to intimidate. Not in my courtroom. The deputies stiffened. The captain's jaw tightened. Caprio was too seasoned to miss it. He folded his hands. Now, he said, turning back to Ethan, let's find out why you're really here. Ethan swallowed hard. Your Honor, I didn't mean for them to come with me. Caprio raised an eyebrow. Then why are they here? Ethan exhaled, a shaky, defeated sound. My uncle is Sheriff Lawrence Harrow. He nodded toward the captain. That's him. A collective murmur filled the courtroom. Recognition, surprise, tension. The sheriff didn't nod, didn't acknowledge, didn't blink. Ethan continued. He, told me I had to show up. He said he didn't trust me to come alone. Said I'd mess it up like I messed everything else up. Judge Caprio's eyebrows lowered, just slightly, but enough to show concern. And these deputies? Caprio asked softly. Ethan hesitated, then whispered, He ordered them. Caprio's face remained composed, but something in his eyes cooled. He had seen families control each other. He had seen fear disguised as obedience. He recognized emotional chains even when they were wrapped in badges. Let's take it one step at a time, Caprio said gently. Tell me about the tickets first. Ethan nodded. One of them was from when I overslept after a double shift at the diner. Another was when I parked outside the hospital to visit my mom. She was recovering from surgery. And the third, his voice cracked. The third was on the day I lost my job. Caprio leaned back slightly, listening. What about the failure to appear? Ethan closed his eyes, pained. My uncle told me he'd handle it, that he'd talk to someone, that I didn't need to go. He opened his eyes. And then he told the deputies I skipped court, that I ignored everything, that I needed to learn a lesson. The sheriff shifted abruptly, irritation flashing across his face. Ethan quickly glanced back at him, flinched, and lowered his head. Judge Caprio noticed. He always noticed. Caprio kept his voice steady, protective. "Ethan, look at me. Only me. You're safe here." Ethan lifted his eyes slowly. Caprio continued. "Do you understand the charges against you?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you dispute any of them?" "No, sir. I wasn't trying to avoid court. I didn't think I was supposed to come because Uncle Larry told me he took care of everything." Caprio turned his gaze toward the sheriff, not confrontational, but piercingly direct. "Sheriff Harrow," Judge Caprio said, "did you advise your nephew not to appear?" The sheriff spoke through a tight jaw. "I told him I'd look into it." "That's not the same thing," Caprio replied gently. "Did you tell him not to appear?" The sheriff didn't answer. The deputies stared straight ahead, silent as though afraid to breathe. Caprio returned his attention to Ethan. "Let me ask you something, Ethan. Why did your uncle insist on coming with you today?" Ethan's lips trembled. His voice shrank. He said, "He wanted to make sure I didn't embarrass the family." A painful silence dropped over the room. Caprio's heart tightened. He had seen defendants hide fear before, but Ethan wasn't hiding it. He was drowning in it. Caprio could feel the emotional tide turning. Something deeper simmered beneath Ethan's words. Shame, pressure, maybe even fear of retaliation. "Ethan," Caprio said softly, "is there something else you're afraid to say?" The young man blinked rapidly. His breath hitched. His throat worked painfully as he swallowed. His eyes darted back toward the sheriff. He froze. Caprio saw it. The fear, the hesitation, the silent plea for help. Inside, the judge's heart clenched. Justice wasn't just law. Justice was humanity. And something was crushing this young man's humanity right in front of him. Caprio took a long breath, then spoke with calm authority that carried decades of experience. "Sheriff Harrow," he said, voice firm, "I'm going to ask you and your officers to step outside the courtroom." You could hear a pin drop. The sheriff's eyes widened. "Your Honor!" "This is not a negotiation," Caprio said, voice steady but immovable. "Your nephew deserves the chance to speak without pressure. My courtroom is not a staging ground for intimidation, intentional or not." Murmurs swept through the room like a wave. The sheriff stood, bristling. "My officers stay with me?" Caprio held his gaze unwavering. "No," he said calmly. "They leave with you." The deputies looked at one another, uncertain. Caprio continued, tone deliberate and controlled. "This is my courtroom, and right now you are disrupting its integrity." The sheriff clenched his jaw, then marched out. The officers followed, boots echoing, tension thick as smoke. The door closed. Silence. A new air entered the room, lighter, safer, fragile. Ethan let out a breath he'd been holding for years. Caprio spoke softly. "Now, Ethan, tell me the truth." For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. The courtroom sat still, so still that the hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly became noticeable. Judge Caprio didn't push him, didn't hurry him, didn't fill the silence. He simply waited, hands folded, gaze steady, offering the one thing Ethan had never truly been given: space to exist without fear. Finally, the words slipped out. "My uncle. He's not a bad man," Ethan whispered. He wants control. Over everything, over everyone, even me." Caprio nodded, encouraging him gently. "Go on." Ethan swallowed. "When my dad died, Uncle Larry stepped in, said he'd shape me up, said he'd make me tough, responsible, disciplined." He laughed weakly. "It never felt like help. It felt like being raised by a drill sergeant. A faint ripple of sympathy moved through the courtroom, quiet, soft. Ethan continued. My mom was too sick to fight him on anything. He decided what job I should have, what friends I should avoid, what mistakes were unacceptable. And whenever I failed, whatever the reason, he made sure I knew it. Caprio listened, eyes gentle but focused. And the tickets? He asked. Ethan nodded. Yeah. When I told him about them, he said only idiots got parking tickets, that I embarrassed him, that I didn't respect the family name. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes, fighting the sting. When the court date came, he said he'd speak to someone, that I shouldn't show up because it made him look bad having a relative in court. Caprio's jaw tightened, just a fraction, not in anger, in understanding. And the obstruction charge? Caprio asked softly. Ethan flinched. That wasn't what it sounds like. His voice trembled. The deputy pulled me over because my taillight was cracked. I reached for my wallet too fast, nervous, and he thought I was resisting. Uncle Larry told them to write it up anyway. He said if I acted stupid, then I needed to deal with the consequences. The courtroom fell silent again, the weight of the truth hanging heavy. Ethan looked up, eyes shimmering. Your Honor, I don't want to blame him. He's family. He thinks he's doing the right thing. But I'm tired. I'm tired of being treated like a problem instead of a person. A tear slipped down his cheek. I just want to live my own life. Even the prosecutor, usually composed, firm, softened. The clerk looked down at her hands, visibly moved. A woman in the gallery quietly dabbed her eyes with a tissue. Judge Caprio inhaled slowly. This wasn't about parking tickets anymore. This wasn't even about obstruction. This was about control, about fear, about a young man suffocating under impossible expectations. Caprio leaned back slightly, his voice steady but warm. Ethan, thank you for your honesty. Ethan nodded, wiping his face. Caprio glanced toward the closed courtroom doors, imagining the sheriff standing outside, arms crossed, pride like armor. Inside, the judge's mind began to shift. Assessing the law, yes, but also the human cost. Ethan, Caprio said softly, earlier, when your uncle was here, you hesitated. You looked afraid. What were you trying to say? Ethan's breath hitched again. He squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, something broke loose. Pain, but also relief. He told me that if I spoke out of line today, if I embarrassed him again, he'd make sure every deputy in the county stopped treating me like family and started treating me like a suspect. A stunned gasp echoed through the courtroom. Ethan's voice cracked. He said I needed to learn respect the hard way, that he'd rather have me scared straight than soft. He shook his head, tears slipping freely now. I didn't want to say it while he was in the room. I've seen how angry he gets. I didn't want to walk outside and pay for it. A woman in the gallery audibly inhaled, shocked. The prosecutor's expression shifted from sympathy to concern. Judge Caprio exhaled slowly. Inside, he felt the familiar clash. Law versus heart. Order versus humanity. But this time the balance didn't feel uncertain. It felt necessary. He let silence settle for several long seconds. Then, gently, almost sorrowfully, he spoke. Ethan, I've sat on this bench for a long time. I've seen young people make mistakes. I've seen families try to protect each other. And sometimes I've seen those same families hurt each other without even realizing it. He paused, voice softening. What you've described, that's not discipline. That's not guidance. That's fear. And fear has no place in a home. Not from a parent, not from an uncle, not from someone wearing a badge. The room fell silent. Caprio continued, speaking not just to Ethan, but to every quiet soul who had ever been dominated by a louder one. The law is meant to protect, but so is family. And when either becomes a weapon instead of a shield, something has gone deeply wrong. He let the words breathe. I've met men who thought kindness was weakness, men who believed fear made people stronger, men who confused control with love. His eyes drifted toward the door again. And I've seen the damage that leaves behind. Caprio leaned forward. But I want you to know something very clearly, Ethan. You have done nothing wrong by telling the truth. Ethan's chin quivered. You are not disloyal for wanting to be treated with respect. You are not ungrateful for wanting to live without intimidation. You are not weak for wanting to breathe freely. Caprio's voice deepened, gentle but unwavering. And you are not alone. Caprio straightened his posture, authority returning to his frame. Before I make any decision, there's something I need to do. He looked at the clerk. Please ask Sheriff Harrow to return to the courtroom. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. Ethan tensed immediately, shoulders stiffening, breath catching. Caprio raised a calming hand. Ethan, look at me. The young man looked up. You are safe. Nothing you said will be used to punish you. I will not allow it. Do you understand? Ethan nodded weakly. The clerk opened the door. Moments later, the sheriff returned, jaw clenched, eyes hard, his deputies trailing behind him like shadows. They took their seats again, the weight of authority pressing back into the room. Caprio watched the sheriff carefully. Sheriff Harrow, he said, voice even, your nephew has answered my questions honestly. Now it is my turn to speak. The sheriff folded his arms. Caprio continued. In all my years on this bench, I've seen many people come into this courtroom carrying fear, but rarely have I seen fear walk in surrounded by badges. A soft gasp from the gallery. The sheriff stiffened. Caprio's voice grew firmer. This young man was not brought here today for justice. He was brought here for discipline, for intimidation, for control. The sheriff's face reddened. With respect, Your Honor. Caprio raised a hand gently. Sheriff, you will have your turn, but you will not interrupt me again. The sheriff fell silent. Caprio looked at Ethan, then back at the uniformed officers. What I've heard today concerns me deeply, not because of the tickets, not because of the missed court date, but because of the environment surrounding this young man. He paused. And because of the environment you tried to bring into my courtroom. The tension reached a breaking point. Every eye in the room locked on Judge Caprio. This courtroom, Caprio said, is a place of truth, not intimidation. He pointed slowly, deliberately toward the deputies. And as long as I am presiding, truth will not stand in the shadow of a badge. The sheriff's jaw dropped slightly. Ethan exhaled shakily. The moment hovered like a held breath. Everything was about to change. Sheriff Harrow rose slowly, as if the ground beneath him had become unsteady. Your Honor, he said, voice tight but controlled, I raised that boy like my own. I taught him values, discipline, responsibility. Kids today. He gestured sharply toward Ethan without looking at him. They're soft. They need structure. Caprio watched him carefully. Sheriff, the judge said, what Ethan needs right now is not your idea of structure. He needs your understanding. The sheriff's brow knit. Understanding is why he's failing. I've given him chance after chance. Ethan flinched. Caprio didn't miss it. And standing behind him with 6 deputies, Caprio said calmly, is your idea of help? The sheriff hesitated, caught between pride and dawning realization. My intention, he said, was to make sure he faced consequences. Caprio's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. Intention does not erase impact. The sheriff fell silent. Caprio leaned forward slightly. Sheriff, let me ask you something. Not as a judge, not as a man in a robe, but as someone who has seen thousands of families pass through this courtroom." The sheriff looked up, unguarded, for a brief instant. "Do you love your nephew?" The sheriff blinked, caught off guard. "Yes, of course I do." "Do you want him to respect you?" "Yes." Caprio nodded. "Then hear me, and hear me well." He spoke slowly, deliberately. Respect built on fear does not last. It crumbles. It bruises. It breaks the person beneath it. The sheriff clenched his jaw, his breath shaky. Caprio continued, voice softening just enough to reach past the uniform. "You lost your brother. Ethan lost his father. You stepped in out of duty, maybe even love. But somewhere along the road, Sheriff, somewhere in the pain and the expectations, guidance turned into pressure. Support became surveillance, and discipline became domination." The courtroom was utterly silent. Not a chair creaked. Not a breath dared escape. Caprio held the sheriff's gaze with a gentle intensity. "You're not a bad man, Sheriff, but good men can lose their way too, especially when grief hardens before it heals." The sheriff's lips parted, but no words came. His eyes flicked to Ethan. For the first time, genuine uncertainty flickered there. Caprio turned to Ethan. "Ethan, if you could say anything to your uncle right now, anything you've held inside, what would it be?" Ethan trembled. Then he looked at his uncle, eyes red but steady. "I know you think you're helping me," he said softly. "I know you want me to be strong. But strength isn't being scared of you. Strength isn't crying in my car because I don't know how to be the person you want." His voice cracked. "I don't want to be a disappointment. But I also don't want to be afraid every time I mess up." A tear slipped down his cheek. "I just want you to see me. Not what you expect. Me." The sheriff swallowed hard. His eyes glistened. Not quite tears, not yet, but close. Sheriff Harrow stood frozen. His authority, his pride, his years of hardened leadership, they all seemed to tremble under the weight of Ethan's words. Slowly, he lowered himself back into his seat. "I didn't know," he whispered. It was barely audible. Ethan looked at him, surprised, wounded, hopeful. The sheriff continued, voice shaking. "I thought, if I pushed you, you'd rise. That fear made men sharper. That pressure made diamonds." His chin quivered. "I didn't realize I was breaking you instead." The gallery exhaled collectively. A deputy lowered his head. Another quietly wiped at his eye. This was no longer a courtroom. It was a family, finally telling the truth. Caprio leaned back, hands folded in front of him, his voice carrying the warmth of wisdom and the firmness of justice. "What we have here today is not a case of parking tickets. It is a case of expectations, misunderstanding, pain, and love that's been twisted by fear." He looked at Ethan. "You, young man, deserve the chance to grow without someone's shadow over you." He looked at the sheriff. "And you, Sheriff Harrow, deserve the chance to guide your nephew with compassion instead of control." He took a deep breath. "The law often deals in penalties and fines, but sometimes the law must deal in humanity." Caprio turned to Ethan first. "For the missed court date, the obstruction, and the 3 parking citations, consider them dismissed." Gasps rippled through the room. Ethan stared in disbelief. Caprio raised a hand, clarifying, "I am dismissing them because I believe you were misled, pressured, and prevented from making your own decisions. You were denied autonomy, not responsibility." He turned to the sheriff. "And Sheriff Harrow, I'm giving you something too." The sheriff straightened, wary. "I'm ordering you to leave this young man's legal matters to him. He will face future mistakes on his own terms, without your interference." The sheriff nodded slowly, humbled. "And more importantly," Caprio continued, "I'm ordering you to talk to your nephew, not as a lawman, not as a disciplinarian, but as family." The sheriff's eyes shimmered now, unmistakably. "Understood, Your Honor," he whispered. Caprio smiled softly. "Good, because fear will never raise a stronger man, but love can." Ethan wiped his face, breathing unevenly. Caprio leaned forward. "Ethan, go live your life. Not your uncle's version of it. Yours." Ethan nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you. Thank you, Your Honor." As the session drew to a close, Caprio looked out over the courtroom. This room that had seen guilt, innocence, pain, and hope all collide in one morning. "We often forget," he said gently, "that authority is not measured by how loudly we speak or how tightly we control others. Authority, true authority, is measured by how much kindness we extend to the people who depend on us." His voice softened. "And sometimes the strongest thing a man can do is let someone else breathe." The sheriff stepped toward Ethan, not with the force he'd always carried, but with something softer, something almost unfamiliar. They didn't hug, not yet, but the sheriff placed a trembling hand on Ethan's shoulder. And for the first time, Ethan didn't flinch. The gallery watched, moved. Caprio closed his folder, the faintest smile on his lips. "Case dismissed," he said quietly, "and may this family find its way back to each other." As Ethan and his uncle walked out, side by side, not in shadow but in uneasy, hopeful light, the courtroom felt warm again, human again, cinematic in a way only real vulnerability can make it. And for a moment, everyone in that room understood something simple and profound. Justice isn't always about punishment. Sometimes justice is giving someone permission to heal,